How would a teacher in the classroom with her or his or her young person, if they're seeing a repeated action of this? So I loved that scenario that you used, and I'm going to speak on behalf of the working parents, that would be me for my whole career, who I don't have the time. I don't have the time, and I needed to get to work. My young person might not have told me how they feel. What are ways constructively that a school or that we could work with the school to begin to address the exact scenario that you talked about? Because and maybe it's my mother guilt speaking here, but I think, and the reason for this question is, I've got a great example of particularly those masking students or those students that don't want to say something. And I remember a conference I was just recently running, and a principal came up and said, we would never have known what the underlying issue was for this young person until we actually began to get longitudinal data and we could see what's happening for this young person. And it showed us on Wednesdays and Fridays that this young person was so distressed when they arrived at school. And when we sat down with mum, it was because mum had to be at work early and she had a meeting and she had to be there and she didn't do her normal things. So that sort of hand over into the school environment. Yeah, that's probably a very complicated one, but I think it's a very common occurrence between school and home.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really important aspect of the monitoring and getting data. We can't presume what's going on here. It's so easy to miss
Mm,
the mark. And again, particularly for children, like we said, they're just learning constantly and trying to take in and interpret just so much stuff. It's impractical, it's impossible for them to be running through us every single interpretation they're making to see if it's right or wrong.
mm,
So a lot of it's just being laid down, and um, the I think the best way to start here is to be doing that monitoring, and monitoring is a
mm,
massive part of what we do clinically to get started, but also to measure change. Looking at just what you've described, looking for patterns and looking everywhere for those patterns as well, because it might be, using another example, it might not be for another kid about mom having to get to work. It might be that, soccer practice runs late the night before, and so dinner is really light on, and or sleep is impacted, and so it's harder to
mm.
regulate themselves in the stress of the morning when our, rhythms are disturbed in this way. So that monitoring is really important to start identifying those patterns and then to start feeding it back, including to the young person. They may not be aware of this either, why Wednesdays are so challenging. And once we get that information, then we're in a position to start seeing how we can improve it.
And that's a really interesting, sorry, Jenny, I'm just going to jump in there.
That's
It's a really interesting, we always say, you know, learning can't start if we haven't got well-being right. And I wish there was another word for well-being, because I feel like it's just this big word now. Like even though I've been in the industry for a long time, but when I'm working with schools or if I'm presenting and we're talking about it, and I said, oh, Jenny, how is Timmy in term 1 on week 3, week 5, and week 7 on Mondays and Thursdays? Because I can see that his attendance was partial or blah, blah, blah. If we don't have that real-time monitoring, and I think monitoring is the wrong word, you've got to be very careful around that. If we don't have that feedback, your brain as a teacher, Jenny, can't retain all that information. And what we've seen, and one of the reasons we exist, is first and foremost, how can we have a common language? So if we go back to that language piece that you were talking about, that we were all talking about, we're expecting our teachers to be able to deliver consistent language and explicit teaching around emotional literacy and self-regulation and adaptive cognitive behavior exercises. But how do we have a whole school approach? And I think that's where technology really is. It provides so much support for a whole community, because it's not something every teacher should have to do on their own. but also we should have a common language around language. We should also be able to see, and today, with particularly with safer technologies for schools and the schools owning the data, it stays within the school, but we're then being able to get, if we want to make up that this person who's having problems going to school is called Timmy. So if Timmy's having issues on Wednesdays and Fridays and he's got behavioural incidents, we're able to get under the hood, we're able to engage families, we're able to get more information, and we're no longer just reporting on behaviour incidents, but we're also able to put in strategies as well, and strategies for on Wednesdays and Fridays. It might be that Timmy loves going to the library for a little while just to chill out, and he loves the librarian, but we can begin to prepare him better for school and set him up for better success, so he doesn't end up being that child that is seen for that behaviour. And I think the information, when I look at the information that most schools have, like they'll say, we have a lot of anxiety. And I'll say, show me, show me. And they'll show me their behaviour reports, or they'll show me their incident reports, or being able to use student voice and begin to build that out and have that as part of the equation of their attendance, their behaviour, their teacher's observation is invaluable to be preventative and to be able to address a young person. And I think we've seen, just a massive shift in the way that families are connecting, parents are connecting, and using student voice when we are looking to have really strong engagement with schools. Because as a mum, I speak as a mum now, it's really hard when things don't, when your little person's suffering or when there's things going on. And I think that connection to school and that family engagement is critical for the support of our young people as well.